Right, the Shadowlands Express. Written by Mark Lynch. What? The train. Can't say why I had chosen to ride the Shadowlands Express. Why me, and why not the countless others who have sinned during their mortal lives? Perhaps all will be forced to face their demons in the end. I can't say for sure, but clearly the odyssey I was thrust into was not of my choosing. I wouldn't have boarded the ghost train if I had known the horrors which lay before me. But despite the terror I lived through and the people I've lost, I strangely feel like I'm a better man because of it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. There's not much I can tell you about myself. I'm not here to recount my life story. I never thought of myself as a bad person. But I've done bad things which resulted in people getting hurt. I've worked in the corporate world for most of my life and never had a problem with screwing people over to advance my career. My company has a culture of working hard, playing hard, and I was one of the greatest proponents of this hedonistic lifestyle. On the fateful night when I boarded the express, I had been out on a town, partying and drinking hard before making a mad dash for the last train home. Honestly, I remember little about the sequence of events that night, as it all passed by in a drunken blur. I vaguely recall running through an abandoned train station, buying a paper ticket from the dead-eye attendant, sprinting down the platform, and jumping inside the carriage mere seconds before the door slammed shut. I was panting and sweating by the time I entered a nondescript train carriage, but I felt satisfied because I made it just in the nick of time. I remember smiling as I collapsed down upon a cushioned seat at an empty booth, hearing the whistle being blown as the train slowly pulled away from the platform, gaining speed as it exited the station and proceeded along the tracks. I felt exhausted at that moment, physically drained by the night of drinking and the dash of the carriage to the carriage. I loosened my tie, wiped the sweat off my brow, and tried my best to keep my eyes open. I didn't want to fall asleep because then I'd surely miss my stop. But try as I might, I simply couldn't fight the overwhelming urge, and slowly but surely, I lost the battle, my eyes losing as I drifted off into a deep slumber. I don't know how long I was out for. It could have been minutes or hours, but I guess my sleepy interlude was long enough to allow the sinister powers to work their dark magic. I do remember what I dreamt during that brief slumber. Surreal, but surprisingly vivid dreams which chilled me to my core. I saw my ex-wife in a dark place, beyond my reach, and suffering alone. Next, I found myself alone in a train carriage, running from the end to end, but finding no one who could help me. As my nightmare continued, I slammed my fist against the carriage door, screaming as I desperately tried to escape my rolling metal prison. But my efforts were to no avail, and I was trapped inside, alone and afraid. I was awake in an instant, gasping for air as I shot up from my seat. I scanned from side to side, somewhat relieved to find out I was still inside the train carriage, and had simply suffered a bad dream. I groggily adjusted my eyes to the harsh strip lights, noting how the brightness inside the carriage compared to the darkness outside the carriage windows. The train was rolling past city streets, but not a light could be seen. Not on the roads or any of the buildings. This struck me as odd, but I didn't dwell on it in that moment. Instead, I pulled myself up off the seat and stumbled down the aisle in search of a conductor. My fear at this point was that I missed my stop and I would end up stranded at a remote station with no means of getting home. And it would have been bad enough, but even as I took those first cautious steps down the carpeted aisle, I felt something wasn't right. I called it a sixth sense, or a primal fear of terrors long forgotten. But I believed I was in a strange and hostile place. Glancing back and forth, I found I was alone in the carriage. This was disconcerting, but not necessarily surprising, as I was riding on a late-night train. The interior was unremarkable, quite ordinary in fact. The blue upholstered soft chairs were set around plastic tables, and tannoy speakers and CCTV cameras were visible on the ceiling above me. I could hear the steady mechanical hum of the engine and of movement under my feet as the vehicle sped ever onwards, but where we were headed I could not say. It was only then that I looked out the carriage windows, observing the darkness on either side of the speeding train. I soon confirmed that there were no lights emanating from the outside, none whatsoever. Every building and every street were shrouded in darkness, with the only illumination coming from the train itself. I couldn't see any cars or vehicles either. In fact, there were no signs of people on the outside. It seemed like we were traveling through an abandoned city devoid of life. How could this be? I asked myself. Perhaps there was a city-wide power cut. That was a possibility, but as I stood in the aisle and looked outwards, I began to feel increasingly uneasy, as the scenes rolling by changed for the worse. Whereas before I saw tidy streets and well-maintained buildings, before long I was confronted by ruins and crumbling structures, a decaying urban landscape, and with weeds and vines slowly taking back the land. I was left gobsmacked, my jaw dropping and blood freezing, as I observed an ever-deteriorating scene. I knew the city had its rundown areas, but nothing like this. I didn't understand what I was seeing, or know where I was. And this uncertainty was truly terrifying. I felt so alone in that moment, like I had been ripped out of the world and dropped somewhere dark, twisted, and bizarre, somewhere I didn't belong. Breaking myself from the fear-induced paralysis, I turned away from the window and slowly made my way down the aisle, looking for the doorway which led to the next carriage. More than anything, in that moment, I wanted to find someone else, so I didn't have to face this nightmare alone. As it happened, I did stumble upon other passengers, but unfortunately, my new companions were just as confused and frightened as I was, and none of us yet knew why we were here, on board the fabled Shadowlands Express. Part 2. The Passengers. Anna was the first person I stumbled across. I don't know whether this was by accident or design, but she was in the next carriage along with me, and I stumbled into her as soon as I entered through the connecting door. Anna was a woman in her early 30s, her appearance striking even at first sight, and I couldn't help but feel attracted to her despite the precarious circumstances. Her skin was dark and her hair brunette, and she wore a straight business suit and matching skirt, which made me think she'd come straight from work. I noted how her mascara had run like she's been crying, and her deep brown eyes were filled with passion, but also fear as she jumped up from her seat and glared at me with suspicion. "Who the hell are you?" she demanded, whilst backing up defensively. My eyes widened as I tried to understand why she was acting so hostile. Then I thought about it, realizing she was scared and had no idea who I was. And so I held my hands up defensively, trying to appear non-threatening as possible whilst replying. "Take it easy, love. My name's Simon. I'm just a passenger like you. I fell asleep on my way home. Now I'm trying to figure out what's going on." The apprehension slowly faded from Anna's brown eyes, and her shoulders relaxed as she breathed a sigh of relief.
Okay, I believe you.
Anna replied slowly, speaking in the aisle as the train sped on past an increasingly bleak landscape.
My name is Anna.
She confirmed.
I guess I'm in the same boat as you. Caught the last train home, fell asleep, and woke up alone in this carriage.
She paused, looking fearfully out the window towards the ruined city shrouded by darkness.
I saw all this outside and I thought I must be losing my mind. Either that or someone spiked my drink back at the bar. Do you see it too? Don't you, Simon?
She looked at me hopefully, clearly wanting some validation. I glanced out the carriage window, observing the same disturbing scenes as the crumbling buildings turned into ruined foundations, overrun with vegetation. It seemed the last vestiges of civilization were melting away in front of our eyes. I could no longer deny or attempt to rationalize away this terrifying sight, because Anna was experiencing it too.
I see.
I finally confirmed, nodding my head sullenly as I continued to stare into the abyss. Anna must have decided to trust me as she walked down the carriage aisle and stood beside me, placing her soft hand on my shoulder. Her touch brought me some small comfort in this chilling scenario. And I turned around slowly, looking into her expressive brown eyes and watching her soft lips as she spoke.
Simon, do you know where we are?
She asked, nervously. I don't think Anna held out much hope, and I was destined to disappoint her.
No,
I answered sullenly.
I'm afraid I have no clue.
Anna broke eye contact, removing her hand as she nodded.
Well, we need to find someone who knows what's going on.
He said with a newfound determination.
Let's search the other carriages, find a conductor who can help. Or, failing that, get to the driver's car and make him stop the train.
Yes, okay then, I said in agreement, following the woman as we slowly walked towards the doors, leading to the next carriage. We didn't discover any train staff during our search, but we did find another 4 passengers, all of whom were in the same state of confusion and anxiety. First, there was Dennis, a willy and highly strung man in his 40s, who was on edge from the moment we met him, ranting, raving, and threatening whoever had put us in this unfortunate situation. Next, we stumbled upon Zoe, a blonde-haired woman with fake nails and eyelashes, her face caked in makeup, and her toned body clad in designer clothes. Zoe had a bad attitude and gave the impression she was above the rest of us. Jason was a better prospect, however, a tall, muscular man with short hair, firm eyes, and a steady smile. He spoke with some authority, which gave me the impression he'd been in difficult situations before, and knew how to keep his cool in a crisis. And finally, we found Emo, a plump, middle-aged man who not only seemed harmless, but was also surprisingly unaffected by the craziness, shrugging his shoulders like this was all just a bit of bad luck. Personally wise, and in appearance, the 6 of us couldn't have been more different, but we were all thrust into this living hell together. And none of us had the slightest idea where we were or why. We didn't find any staff members and couldn't get an answer from the driver's car, the door to which was firmly locked. Our phones were of no use either, surprisingly. None of us had a signal. The train didn't have Wi-Fi. We walked the train carriages from end to end, trying to find something, anything which could help. Emergency lever was no use. We pulled it, but the train kept speeding on. Next, Dennis got the idea of using a glass breaker hammer. He promptly obtained the hammer, posing it against the window, ready to smash the safety glass. even though we told him it was pointless, as the train was still traveling at considerable speed. Dennis wouldn't listen to us, however. Before he could strike the blow, we were all stirred by a disembodied voice calling out to us through the carriage speakers.
Please, sir, I must insist you put the hammer down. Petty vandalism will not be tolerated.
The voice was surprisingly polite, but at the same time authoritative, and more than that, more than a little sinister. I don't think any of us knew what to think, but the mysterious voice captured our full attention. And even Dennis lowered the hammer and turned his head in astonishment. Part 3. The Conductor. We all looked up at Tannoy, all frozen in shock as we waited for the voice to speak again.
Now, sir, please set the hammer down on the table. There's a good chap.
And the unidentified male voice was being deliberately patronizing. I didn't expect Dennis to react well, and so I was surprised when my fellow passenger meekly complied with the instruction, dropping the glass breaker down with a dull thud. A tense moment of silence between followed before Zoe spoke out.
Who the hell are you?
She demanded.
And more importantly, where are you?
Clearly, our question was directed towards a anonymous man communicating through the tannoy. I considered this pointless as the speaker wasn't a two-way radio, so surely he couldn't hear us. But once again, I was surprised because this boy voice did answer.
Well, madam, I am the conductor, of course. This train and you, the passengers, are my responsibility. And where am I, you ask? I'm right here where I've always been, riding the Shadowlands Express. This train is my home and always will be.
His reply was cryptic and oddly chilling. I was left speechless whilst trying to understand the meaning behind the conductor's words. But Zoe talked back through clenched teeth.
There is no conductor on board the train,
she snarled.
We search every carriage end to end.
The conductor responded with a dry chuckle.
I assure you, madam, I'm not here. You may not be able to see my physical appearance, but I can see and hear everything that occurs on board.
A chill went up my spine upon hearing those words. I think Zoe had a similar feeling, as her eyes widened in shock before she looked down at her expensive heeled shoes. Jason was next to speak out. I noticed how he picked up the safety hammer which Dennis dropped, and when Jason spoke, his voice sounded calm and composed. Why have you brought us here? And what do you want from us? Jason had asked what we were all thinking, although I certainly fear hearing the answer. But the conductor once again used cryptic language which was open to interpretation.
But sir, I have not brought you here. You all boarded the train voluntarily. If you paid attention to the signs, you would realize that this wasn't a conventional service. But let me say this, every one of you is here for a reason.
The thing is, mate, Jason interjected. We all just want to go home. He was right, of course, but somehow I doubted it would be that simple. This means some regret in the conductor's voice when he replied.
Understandable, sir. Very understandable. I wish it was in my power to bring each of you home right now, this instant. But alas, this is not possible. I can't guarantee the outcome of this journey, but I can promise two things. Firstly, none of you will be physically harmed aboard my train. In these carriages, you are safe. Secondly, there's a path home for each and every one of you, but the journey will be long and arduous, and all passengers will be tested.
He let the statement hang in the air as the six of us shared a worried look. The fear inside the tight train carriage was palpable. Even Jason seemed uneasy. None of us really understood what was happening, but we all sensed a great danger. The disembodied conductor was the only one with any answers, but he wasn't willing to provide them, at least not yet. Instead, he signed off for the night.
I suggest you all try to get some rest,
the doctor suggested.
We have a long way to go and many challenges to face. You are free to move between the carriages, but please do not attempt to exit the train.
This is not physically possible and may result in injury or death. I would have also. Oh, wait.
One. Oh, wrong voice. This is not physically possible and may result in injury or even death. I will also advise you not to look out the windows for prolonged periods. You will likely be disturbed by what you see out there, but of course, this is your choice. I think that's all for now. I'll speak with you again tomorrow and provide details of your first test. Good night, all.
With that, the speakers went silent, and the conductor would not answer, no matter how many times we shouted and screamed in an attempt to get his attention. Eventually, we settled down, sitting together in the middle carriage as we tried to come to terms with our insane situation. We talked for some time, exchanging outlandish theories on what this might be. The most persuasive argument was that we'd been placed inside some kind of twisted experiment, and perhaps we were hallucinating due to a psychedelic drug or gas. It seemed unlikely, but just about plausible. Other possibilities discussed included alien abduction or descent into purgatory. Find the last option particularly chilling. Were we all dead? I don't think so. But I still feel alive and have all the same urges, feelings, and bodily functions. Thankfully, there was a functional toilet on our speeding phantom train. We had 3 plastic bottles between the 6 of us, which we could fill with water from the tap, except Zoe refused to share her bottle, and Dennis insisted on drinking straight from the tap. There was no food on board the train, however. This would become a problem the longer our journey dragged on. The conductor told us not to look out the carriage windows. Good advice, but easier said than done. As the night went on, the ruined city was replaced by a dark forest with tall trees on either side of the tracks. This fast wooded area went on for mile after mile, and the forest was empty. Every now and then, we caught glimpses of dark shadows moving between the trees, large, unidentified creatures shaken from their slumber by the passing train. This was disconcerting, but worse still, there were the red eyes we occasionally saw, eyes burning in the darkness and glaring menacingly at our carriages, watching us until we sped out of sight. I can't speak for the others, but these sightings terrified me. I try to avoid looking out the window as much as possible, but my gaze is often drawn to the blackness. It was Anna who made the discovery which cast some light on our situation. She examined the ticket she bought at the station and found a message printed on the back. As it turned out, we all had our proverb or other communication written on the rear of our paper tickets, all unique and apparently personalized. We did not share our messages with the group, at least not on the first night. But I believe we were all shaking after reading those written words, perhaps even more so than the terrors we witnessed outside the windows. I can only speak for my own proverbs, which read, "A false witness will not go unpunished, and whoever pours out lies will not go free." I struggled to control my emotions as I read those words again and again. I couldn't say for sure just yet, but I had an idea why I was here. Part 4. The Platform. None of us slept much that night. I did finally drop off due to the sheer exhaustion, only be plagued by dark and vivid nightmares, awakening with a jolt. I found my companions still asleep, with the exception of Eamon, who was looking out of the window with intense curiosity. I quickly noted that it was now morning, with the rising sun shining through the carriage window. I was relieved at first, as part of me had feared the morning would never come. But I felt less certain once I realized we were still traveling through a dense forest of seamlessly endless trees, with no apparent signs of civilization. "It's been like this since dawn." Amen. explained in almost wonderment, without turning away from the window. No towns, villages, no people, no trains or vehicles. Just an endless track with trees on either side of us. He paused briefly and let those words and their terrifying implications sink in. By my reckoning, we've been traveling for between 8 and 9 hours at a constant speed of 50 to 50 miles per hour. We should have reached the coast hours ago, but I guess the geography on this world is different than ours. I felt sickness rising from the pit of my stomach, my eyes widening as I stared at Damon in disbelief before turning towards the glass and staring out into the abyss. The vast forest wasn't quite as intimidating during the night daylight hours. Nevertheless, there was an eerie quality to those towering trees. A surreal and almost mythical feeling that awoke something primal inside me. As crazy as it sounded, I believe Amon was right. We weren't in home country counties anymore. In fact, the train seemed to have left our dimension, bringing us another world with its own rules and unique dangers. Thankfully, we did eventually reach the end of the forest later that morning, although our situation did not improve. The dense woods were replaced by mile after mile of rolling green hills, desolate, wind-swept, and seemingly empty moors set under grim gray skies. We didn't pass through any settlements during that long first day. The most we saw was an occasional stone cottage set upon an isolated hillside. Most appeared abandoned, but occasionally we spotted figures standing behind windows or in doorways. Dead-eyed farmers and their families dressed in rags and observing our train as it sped past. And all stood solemn and silent, like they were watching a funeral procession. Every 50 miles or so we passed a platform. Our train never stopped or even slowed down. There didn't seem to be any point in these platforms existing, as they were merely elevated walkways with nothing of note anywhere near them. The first couple of platforms we flew past were empty, but a solitary figure was standing on the third. An elderly woman with disheveled white hair, wrinkled skin, and wearing a blood-red dress. I remember the cold chill I experienced when I first saw her, a deep terror which I couldn't fully explain. We all watched her silence through the carriage windows, noting a twisted smile on her lips as she followed our progress along the tracks, lifting her arm to wave at us in an act of horrifying mockery. We called this woman the Hag, and we must have seen her at least a dozen times during our long journey. The Hag always stood alone on the platform and watched as our train rolled by. Sometimes she stood in a silent vigil, other times she smiled and waved. But the worst occasions were when the Hag reacted with hostility to our presence, running along the platform with pure hatred in her eyes, while screaming obscenities which we could not hear. I don't know whether it was the same woman every time or a series of doppelgangers. It should have been physically possible for an elderly woman to travel hundreds of miles in mere hours, but the unrecognizable laws of physics didn't seem to apply in this world. The Hag stopped appearing as we approached sundown, only to be replaced by an even more sinister figure. As the light faded, we were confronted by a hooded man who stood upon the passing platforms, a figure dressed from head to toe in dark robes, with his face covered. He called this chilling entity the Harbinger, although I feared he might represent something even darker. I never saw his face because it was covered by his hood. Still, we sensed the Harbinger was closely observing our progress through this realm. And he wasn't alone. The Harbinger was always accompanied by a huge white dog, more like a wolf than an actual face, which she kept on a tight leash, while the Harbinger always remained still and silent. His mutt barked maniacally at the train, struggling against the chain, her eyes burning with hatred and hunger, and with the maw filled with razor-sharp fangs. The day was filled with terror and paranoia, as my fellow passengers and I were pushed close to the breaking point. I don't recall all the conversations we had between those terrifying interludes. We tried to make plans, but could find no solutions. There was some talk of our lives back home, about families, friends, pets, hobbies, and jobs, about what we missed and wanted to get back to. Although some were more willing to share personal details than others. I saw the best and worst of my companions in those long hours. Jason revealed he was a former soldier, and he continued to try and take charge in the chaos, although in a practical sense, he was effectively powerless. Denny was continually on edge and prone to angry outbursts, which made him increasingly unpopular within our small group. Zoe wasn't much better, spoilt and entitled. She kept insisting that she shouldn't be here, as if any of us had a choice. By contrast, Eamon barely spoke at all, instead silently staring out the window, like he was memorized by the bizarre sights beyond the carriage. I began to think that Anna and I were the only sane people on board. We continued to bond and become closer despite the extreme stress of our situation. We made several attempts to gain conductor's attention throughout the day, frequently shouting into the speakers, but to no avail. The conductor ignored us throughout the day, but only speaking to us after dusk, when he communicated the instructions for our first test.
Good evening, passengers,
the conductor suddenly explained, his chilling voice booming through the PA system. We all jumped and startled by the sudden intrusion.
Where the hell have you been?
Dennis snarled angrily. But the conductor simply ignored him, continuing in what he seemed to be a pre-prepared script.
Well, we'll soon be arriving at their first stop. The instructions are simple but must be followed to a letter. All passengers must leave the carriage and step onto the platform. As you disembark, you will find provisions waiting for you. Feel free to stack up on food and drink. When you have done so, you must stay on the platform and wait for the instructions. Do not leave the platform under any circumstances. I hope this is clear, and I look forward to welcoming you back on the carriage once the business is settled. Good luck.
That was it, the message in full, and the conductor wouldn't answer our frantic demands for further information. We wondered whether this was a trick, but sure enough, our train did begin to slow before finally coming to a halt beside a dimly lit platform. And the carriage door shot open, but none of us moved an inch. Fear entered my companion's eyes as the cold air from the outside hit us. In a sense, this is what we all wanted. The train finally stopped after a non-stop journey over hundreds of miles. The carriage doors were open, but still none of us were in a hurry to disembark, not given the horrors we witnessed outside the train's windows. The conductor had given us clear and simple instructions, but how could we trust them? Still, there was an added incentive to step onto the platform. At the far end of the elevated walkway, you could see two vending machines stocked with crisps, chocolates, processed food, soft drinks, and bottled water. We had water on the train, but no food, and hunger was starting to hit home. We debated for some time over whether to disembark and eventually voted in favor of this action. As Jason put it, this conductor, whoever's run this thing, they own all the cards. We're going to follow their rules, or at least for the time being, but sooner or later they'll slip up, and then we'll have our opportunity. Jason was the first to step off the train, closely followed by Dennis, and then the rest of us. It was a cold night, and the chill hit us after the relative comfort of the carriage. I also picked up a foul smell in the air, a stench which seemed familiar, but I couldn't quite place. But our prime focus was on reaching the vending machines. We didn't need to insert money. It could take as much food as we wanted. Once we tasted the produce and realized it wasn't poisoned, We filled our hands and bags with supplies, stocking up as much as we could carry. Because there was no way of telling how long we'd been trapped on board the Phantom train. With this task completed, we stood and waited, warily glancing towards the dark trees beyond the lit-up platform, as we waited for further instructions. "What now?" I asked, addressing my question to Jason.
We wait for orders, just like he had told us.
What was his stern answer? "Here with it." This was Dennis. His blood was up again. His eyes filled with something close to madness. "You need to calm down, mate," Vincent said firmly, whilst looking at Dennis square in the eye. But it was to no avail. "I won't calm down, no fucking way," Dennis screamed. "You people are nuts. You want to let that voice tell you what to do, not me, mate. I'm stepping off and going home."
No, Dennis,
Anna cried in distress.
we don't know what's out there.
But Dennis simply scoffed dismissively. "I'll take my chances. No one getting back on that fucking train." I moved towards Dennis, intending to physically restrain him if necessary, but Jason stopped me from doing so, placing a firm hand on my shoulder, shaking his head in the negative. A moment later, and Dennis was off on the edge of the platform, sprinting into the forest, but he didn't make it far. We didn't witness our companion's grisly death, thankfully. It was too dark to see, but we did hear every horrific detail as the slaughter played out in the blackness. First came a low animalistic growl, followed by a chilling scream from Dennis as he surely realized he'd made a terrible mistake. A violent rustling came from the bushes. Dennis continued the scream frantically as the growling beast tore into him with teeth and claws, ripping flesh and cracking bones. Mercifully, it was as soon over as Dennis stopped screaming, and all we could hear was the sound of a body slowly being dragged away.
Oh my god.
Zoe explained with tears of terror rolling down her cheeks. A moment of shocked silence followed before speakers attached to the platform's lamps burst to life.
First test is now concluded. Please return to the train without delay.
It was the conductor's voice, and we all obeyed, quickly jumping back on board the carriage before the door shut and the train started to move forward, leaving the cursed platform behind. 6 of us had disembarked, and only five had gotten back on board, with the reckless Dennis devoured by the beast. We all sat stunned silence for some time, the tree sped ever onwards. Eventually, the conductor provided an explanation of sorts.
Alas, Dennis is no Roy. He merely needed to obey the instructions, but instead he tried to run. Perhaps not surprising. In life, Dennis never held down the job, and he abandoned his wife and children, running away as always in his nature. Then why test him?
Anna responded angrily.
You know what he would do, so what's the point? On the contrary, madam,
The conductor replied coolly.
I had no prior knowledge of what Dennis would do. His actions may have been predictable, but Dennis had free will, as do all of you. You should bear this in mind during the trials to come.
None of us had anything to say to that, the 5 of us sitting in wordless and fearful contemplation as our grimly odyssey continued. Part 5. The Station House. The second day passed pretty much like the first. Night turned to day, and this force was once again replaced by rolling hills. We continued to see the entities on many of the platform we speed past. The old hag became more aggressive, chasing the train as far as the end of the platform, screaming blow murder with pure unadulterated hatred in her dark eyes. The Harbinger remained silent, although his presence was increasingly sinister, with his eyeless glare burning through us. And then there was the hellhound barking menacingly at the murderous rage. We couldn't help but notice the fresh blood pouring from the canine's fang-filled mouth. After a while, we stopped looking out the window entirely. Although we found a little solace inside the speeding train, Dennis' death had hit us hard. We now realized how dangerous this place truly was. Hope beginning to began to fade, and I wondered whether any of us would make it home. We split into groups during the day, sitting in separate carriages and barely interacting. Surprisingly, Jason and Zoe formed a partnership despite their differences in personality and background. I think Zoe wanted a strong man who would protect her, and perhaps Jason needed someone to protect. Anna and I stayed close, holding each other as we slept and talked throughout the long day. I almost share all we said and did whilst alone together. Some things should remain private, but Anna brought me comfort during these hellish hours, and I'd like to think I returned the favor. And finally, there's an enigmatic Eamon who occupied the carriage by himself, still refusing to engage with the group. A familiar pattern emerged as the PA system remained silent till nightfall, bursting to life after dusk as the conductor communicated instructions for our second test.
Good evening, passengers. I trust you have had a comfortable day's travel.
I noticed how the conductor's tone sounded less enthusiastic and more subdued than it had previously been. Like the idea was draining for him too.
We will shortly be stopping at the station house. Here you will face your next challenge. You shall proceed into the lobby. There you will find 5 doors, one marked for each of you. Inside you will discover the reason why you are here. Facing your past sins is the first step towards redemption. Those of you who pass this test may re-embark for the final nightfall journey. I wish you good luck.
Anna and I shared a look of fearful apprehension as the train began to slow.
Do we have to do this?
Anna said nervously.
I think so,
I answered whilst taking her hand. And when the train stopped, we cautiously stepped onto the platform, joining our companions as the 5 of us were faced with this fresh horror. The station house was dimly illuminated by lamps on the platform, and there was a faint light shining within. The house was a red bricked building, with a slate-tilted roof. It looked Victorian in design. It could have been abandoned for decades. Although, at the same time, the structure appeared well maintained with no visible signs of deterioration or decay on the outside. The 5 of us stood on the platform for a long moment, staring at the red bricked house in terrified awe, like it had held some kind of dark power over us. I think we all knew we had to step inside. It seemed there was no other choice. Still, I feared what we'd encounter on the other side of those ominous walls. It seemed like we all shared the same apprehension. All except for the ever-bizarre Eamon, who stepped forward and marched towards the heavy front door, slowly turning the handle and stepping inside. The rest of us shared a look. Anna shook her head, tears in her eyes as she made a last-ditch attempt to persuade me not to enter. Perhaps she was right, but in that moment, I felt I needed to be strong for us both. As I took her hand, we marched forward towards the open door. Jason and Zoe followed in our tracks. Soon all 5 of us were inside the lobby. I jumped as the front door slammed shut behind us. Jason ran back, struggling with the handle before turning back to us in frustration. "It's locked," he confirmed sullenly. Somehow I wasn't surprised. There was no way to exit. We were forced to survey our grim surroundings. The station house appeared larger on the inside than it looked on the outside. I couldn't say whether this was optical illusion or result of black magic. In any event, I forgot all about everything else when I glanced over the far side of the lobby and saw 5 wooden doors, each marked with a name crudely written in red chalk. Jason, Zoe, Eamon, Anna, and Simon. One doorway for each of us, me included. It wasn't the strangest thing, because in that moment, none of us said a word. Not one of us fought the unnatural urge to walk towards our inside doors and face whatever lay within. I looked at Anna as we walked side by side, but she didn't meet my eye. Perhaps she no longer needed me. My hand shook as I reached for the handle, slowly sliding the door open and stepping inside. I can't say exactly what my 4 companions experienced inside their own rooms, although I can hazard a guess based on the dark revelations that were later confessed. All I can describe is my own experience, a descent into my own into my personal hell as my worst moments flashed in front of my eyes. Because what lay behind my door wasn't a room to a conventional sense. Rather, it was a journey into my sordid past. A mirror used to reflect my ugliest shine and shine light on my worst sins. Good times came first, reminders of what I'd lost, or rather thrown away. I relived the first date I had with Kate, as vivid and real as when I first experienced it all those years ago. More images flashed in front of my eyes, reigniting emotions I had long since tried to bury. First time we made love, our wedding day, how beautiful she looked whilst walking down the aisle in her stunning white dress. But then came the bad times, the complacency I had for my marriage, even in the earliest days, as I worked late every night and left my Kate home alone. The next was the affair, the first illicit kiss with Sandra at the office party, the night we spent together whilst away at the conference. It was gut-wrenching to see my moments of weakness played out again, except it was worse this time, because I could see how it was for Kate, how much it hurt her. When she found out about my betrayal, her heart broke into two. Kate broke down after the divorce. I saw it all inside the hellish room. The excessive drinking, the suicide attempt, and finally the forced stay at the psychiatric hospital. Back in the real world, I didn't go to see her, not even once. But now I saw it all. Kate sitting alone in a locked room, heavily medicated, her skin pale and her eyes devoid of passion or hope. She was a shell of her former self, and all because of what I'd done. I felt physically sick by the time it was over, stumbling out of the room and back into the lobby. Judging by the shaken looks on the faces of my companions, I guessed we'd all faced our personal demons in those damn rooms, but there was one person missing. Zoe had exited her room, and her door was still shut. As if on cue, we heard a high-pitched scream emanating from the other side of the door as Zoe desperately cried out for help. Jason jumped into action, slamming his shoulder against the locked door with all of his might. Anna and I joined in, and somehow we broke inside, but what we witnessed in that room was horrifying. Set against the far wall is what I can only describe as a portal, a swirling vortex of crimson red, burning fiercely, leading to God knows where. A hideous arm extended from the vortex, a black appendage with sharp claws that held tight grip on its victim. Of course, the victim was Zoe. The woman was down on the ground, her eyes filled with dread as she screamed for help. Jason darted forward to reach out for her hand, but it was already too late. The claw dug deep into Zoe's exposed leg, pulling her rapidly towards the portal. I'll always remember the final look in the woman's eyes, the sheer, unadulterated terror as she was dragged kicking and screaming into hell. It was all over before we could do a thing, as Zoe peered into the vortex, and the portal promptly vanished into thin air, leaving us staring at the blank wall in an empty room, barely able to comprehend what we just witnessed. 5 minutes after the horror, and we were back on the train. What else could we do? I was almost broken by what we experienced in that damn station house. I believe my companions felt the same, or at least Jason and Anna did. We sat together in the middle of the carriage, remaining silent as the train slowly pulled away from the platform before gaining speed. A tense moment passed before tannoy sounded and the conductor spoke. 5 internally full passengers return. A shame, but perhaps not unexpected. Jason's face screwed up with raw anger as he jumped off his seat and removed a concealed weapon from his jacket pocket. "You fucking bastard!" cried, directing his fury towards the carriage speaker. "You sent her to die. You sent her to die." Before we could stop him, Jason used a safety hammer to strike the speaker, smashing it to pieces in an act of vandalism, born from grief and frustration. But his action proved entirely futile, because the invisible conductor could speak to us, his voice clear and composed, as he answered discretion. "Please, sir, I'm a tolerant man, but I have my limits." Jason stood defiant in it for a moment, but the anger soon faded from his red face, He meekly sat back down whilst returning the hammer to his pocket. "Thank you, sir," the conductor said, as clearly he could see and hear everything. "Your credit for your fund is understandable, but as I've already said, my role is simply to facilitate your journey. I'm not responsible for whatever happens beyond the carriage doors." "But why Zoe?" Anna asked emotionally. "We only went in the rooms, but the rest of us walked away. Why was she taken?" "The answer is quite simple," the conductor responded. "All of you are afflicted with their past sins, and a full of you share genuine guilt, shame, and remorse over their actions, but not Zoe. She married an old and wealthy man she didn't love, waited until he died so she could claim his fortune. But in the end, she could not acknowledge her wrongdoing. That's why Zoe failed the test." None of us had a word to say after that. This outcome was madness as far as I was concerned. Sure, Zoe was a gold digger. She done a shitty thing. Was her sin bad enough for her soul to be condemned? And what was the point of this insane odyssey anyway? Did any of us have a chance of making it home? Or would the sadists who ran this dark round pick us off one by one? The conductor remained silent, and I doubted we'd get the answers we needed from him. But all of us had secrets, me included, and I thought now was the time for us difficult conversations. My throat was dry and my voice trembled, but I forced myself to speak the words. "We all had visions in those rooms, visions of our past sins," I began whilst attempting to meet my companion's eyes. "I'm not proud of what I relived back there, but I'm willing to tell you my sordid tale. I think we all need to know why we're here. Knowledge is power, and sharing our pain might just help us get home." I looked at my companions and noted initial horror which came over Jason and Anna, but eventually they accepted the wisdom behind my suggestion and reluctantly agreed to share our dirty laundry. Not so with Amon. He didn't respond at all to my suggestion, turning to stare out the window as if he hadn't even heard me. Nevertheless, I decided to lead by example, recounting my shameful account of my affair and abandonment of my wife. I closely watched Anna's reaction once I finished my story. She didn't say anything, but I swore I could see disgust in Anna's eyes. I believe she lost respect for me. But as it happened, my female companion had her own dark secret to reveal. "I was driving home from work on a Thursday night," she began, her voice monotone and eyes facing downwards. "I was tired and distracted, sending a text instead of paying attention to the road." She sighed deeply before continuing as tears returned to her brown eyes. "I didn't see the red light. It hit the other car head on. I was lucky, my airbag deployed, and I walked away from the crash with barely a scratch. The other driver was not so lucky. She was left paralyzed from the waist down, and will spend the rest of her life in a wheelchair. The judge went easy on me, a suspended sentence and a driving ban. I guess I got lucky again, or at least until now." She glanced up at me, her eyes red and bloodshot. She was forced a nervous smile. I guess Anna wanted some reassurance, but I had nothing to say in that moment, and I broke off eye contact. Jason's account was next, his tough exterior cracking as he emotionally opened up. "I was on my second tour in Helmet Province," explained the troubled veteran. "We got intelligence that a Taliban bomb maker was hiding in a local house, and so we executed a dawn raid. I headed to clear a bedroom upstairs, saw some movement out the corner of my eye, reacted on instinct, turning and shooting. It was only then that I realized what I had done." He took a deep breath, mustered up the courage, and finished his tragic tale. "I'd killed a kid, maybe even 11 or 12 years old, unarmed and innocent child. I'll never forget looking in her mother's eyes as she cradled her boy's still warm body. Raw grief and anger as she cursed me to hell. The OC made the incident go away. Collateral damage, and that's what I called it. I never faced any charges, but I couldn't go back to combat after that. They gave me a medical discharge and sent me home. That boy, what I did, it allowed me to the grave." Jason looked out the carriage window mournfully, lost in his trauma and guilt. I wanted to say something, but once again I couldn't find the words. Instead, I turned my attention to the ever-distant Amon, needing to slam my fist on the table to get his attention. "Hey, mate," I explained while meeting Amon's unfocused, bloodshot eyes. You need to talk to us. The only way we can get through this is if we work together. It was cliche line, but true nonetheless. But Eamon was having none of it. He scoffed in contempt, jumping from his seat and pushing his way out into the aisle. He began to stomp angrily towards the next carriage, but before doing so, Eamon turned and met my eye, snarling as he delivered a cryptic and ominous message.
And I know what I've done. And I know what I need to do to set things right. That's all you'll get from me.
And with that, Eamon barged out of the carriage, leaving the three of us sitting in mournful silence as our phantom train continued to speed through the darkening hellscape. Part 6. The Dark City. It rained heavily all the third day, from dawn to dusk and on into the long night before we reached our final destination. The bad weather only added to the misery of our increasingly grim situation. Our morale was broken, the four of us are physically separated, each sitting alone in our own carriages. Anne and I tried to reconnect after revelations the night before, but were unable to do so. Why there was suddenly a divide between us, I couldn't say for sure. My guess was that we were both ashamed. In any event, day 3 was the worst yet. The hag did not appear during the daylight hours, and the platform she previously occupied remained empty. Yet I don't know why she left us. Perhaps her purpose had been fulfilled, or maybe her warnings had fallen on deaf ears. The Harbinger was still there, however. His black robes somehow shielding him from the torrential rain, as his soaked dog barked by his side. The dark entity seemed more prominent and intimidating on the third day, and I feared he would play a central role in our ultimate fate. The guilt, the constant rain, and chilling visions would have been bad enough, but the train decided to introduce a new, terrifying element to this. As usual, the conductor didn't speak with us during the daytime, but others did. Disembodied voices echoed through the carriages, 2 voices in fact, 1 male and 1 female. They sounded familiar, and soon I made a connection. It was Dennis and Zoe. The 2 lost passengers were calling out to us from whatever hellscape they'd been exiled to. For hours, I was forced to listen to my former companion's sporadic screams and pleas for mercy, as they were subjected to unseen tortures. But worse still were the periods where Dennis and Zoe were lucid, and they spoke fondly of their fellow passengers on the Shadowlands Express. Sometimes they called us out by name, telling us that we'd meet again soon. In the end, we all congregated in the middle of the carriage as darkness fell, only because we needed support each other in the face of these many terrors. Even Amon seemed shaken by their voices, and I believe he may be willing to work with us. I can't describe how revealed I was to hear the conductor's voice coming through the tannoy shortly after dusk. Although, predictably, he didn't have good news for us.
Good evening, passengers. We will shortly be approaching our final stop, the Central Station in the Dark City. This train will terminate here. Please ensure that you will take all personal possessions with you when you disembark. I thank you for riding the Shadowlands Express.
We all looked at each other in astonishment, hardly believing what we just heard.
What the hell does he mean?
And I explained in shock.
No, this isn't right,
I proclaimed, my angry frustration boiling to the surface.
You told us that we would get home and follow the rules.
There was a pause. I swore I could hear a deep sigh from the other side of the line before the conductor eventually answered.
This is exactly what I said, sir, but I owe you an explanation nonetheless. I promised you would be safe on board my train, but our journey ends here. You should make your way to the next station on the other side in the city to catch the connecting service. Consider this your 3rd and final test.
We all glanced out the window, noting how the dark woods are now replaced with bleak concrete buildings illuminated by harsh artificial lights.
So that's it then? We're on our own?
Anna asked fearfully.
I'm afraid so, madame.
The conductor replied, with some regret evident in his voice.
I wish I could do more, but I'm just a humble servant, and my place is here. The most I can offer you is my advice. Remember what you've learned here. Watch your backs and follow the signs. I wish you good luck.
This is the last we ever heard from the pneumatic conductor as the speakers went silent for the last time. The train drove past empty streets and grim buildings before eventually arriving at the so-called central station. Instead of a busy terminus one might have expected, we instead saw one empty, rain-swept platforms devoid of other trains or even a single passenger. We came to a slow stop alongside platform 1 and the door swung open, exposing us to the cold, damp outside. We all sat perfectly still for a moment, unsure of what to do next. As hellish as our journey had been, this train served as a safe haven, at least compared to the horrors beyond its doors. And every time we disembarked, someone had died. We had no idea what dangers lurked out on the streets of this dark city, but whatever lay out there was surely our destiny, and we had no choice but to face it. Eamon was the first to step off the wet platform, followed by Jason, then Anna, and finally me. I took one last mournful glance at the Shadowlands Express before doors slammed shut and we proceeded down the hallway. The station interior was clean, well-lit, sterile, and entirely abandoned. We cautiously walked across the tile floor, observing the empty ticket kiosks and vacant commercial stalls. We all noted the sign hanging over the building exit which read, "This way to the Nexus station." The doctor had told us to follow the signs, and Nexus is where we should catch our connecting train. In that moment, Jason regained some of his former strength as he attempted to take charge of the situation. "Okay, guys, we don't know what's outside those doors. We must be prepared to defend ourselves. We need to search the station and find anything we can use as weapons." Anne and I looked at each other concerned, but Amen leaped into action, searching for an empty food stall and soon unveiling a sharp kitchen knife. "Good man," Jason said with a nod before turning towards Anna and I. "Now do we need to?" Jason never got a chance to finish the sentence. Eamon moved so fast and we didn't have the time to shout a warning. He charged at Jason from behind, brutally stabbing him in the back without a second's hesitation. Jason squealed in shock pain as Eamon pulled a knife out. The ex-soldier swung around, grabbing Eamon by the throat and attempted to throttle him. But Eamon stabbed Jason again and again in his stomach and chest, spilling his blood on the white tiles. Jason looked to us with shock and pain in his pale face as he collapsed and died on the blood-soaked floor.
"What the fuck have you done?"
Anna screamed. Eamon looked at him in a wild fury, with his dark eyes and bloody knife still on his left hand.
"I told you last night,"
He spat.
"I know what I have to do to set things right. I know I'm gonna finish that. It said so on my ticket. Slay every sinner and you will walk free."
With that, the killer stepped over Jason's body and marched towards us with murderous intent. I could see there was no reasoning with Eamon. He'd lost his mind and would kill again without hesitation. So I did the only thing I could think of in that moment. I grabbed hold of Anna's hand and we ran together, sprinting out of the station exit and onto the rain-swept streets. Anna and I took in the middle of the dark city as we sprinted down the pavements with heavy rain falling on our heads and a psychotic Eamon in hot pursuit. Still, I suspected there was little we'd wish to see. The city was grim and austere to an almost absurd extent, consisting of largely of ugly tower blocks and empty storefronts, with every building constructed in the brutalist style. There were no monuments, parks, or even trees, nothing that would give this anomalous conurbation even a shred of identity. And the city was virtually, but perhaps not entirely, abandoned. There were no pedestrians or vehicles on the streets, but occasionally we spotted the dark silhouettes of anomalous figures standing in upper windows and glaring down on us. We had no knowledge of the city's geography or even its size, but the signs were clear and constant, and so we directed towards the station. During our mad dash through puddles and gutters, we dared not to stop because Eamon was surely on our tail, just waiting for his opportunity to strike. Part 7. The Return Ticket. I don't know how long we ran through those dark, rain-swept streets, following the signposts with a slim hope of salvation. We might have fared miles in our mad dash, always fearing what lay behind each corner. I had an instinct feeling that Eamon wasn't the only one hunting us. Both Anna and I both experienced elation when we sprinted down a lonely black streak and saw the promised train station before us, its entrance clearly marked with a sign reading Nexus. We were so close, but of course salvation wasn't so easy. Anna slipped in a puddle and I leaned over to assist her. We hadn't seen or heard Eamon for some time, and hoped we lost him in the Dark City's maze-like streets. But he was right on our tail, buying his time before launching his attack. I saw him charging through the rain, a crazed look in his eyes as he screamed like a berserker, raised his knife to strike. Anna was still down and vulnerable, so I had to act. I blocked Eamon's path, hoping I could overpower him, force the knife from his hand, but Eamon collided with my body with great force, knocking me down onto the wet pavement. He stood over me with a knife in hand, ready to plunge the blade in my chest. I doubt I could have stopped him, but thankfully Anna intervened. She pushed the attacker back and tried to grab his knife, but Eamon slashed her across the stomach. Anna screamed. Her eyes filling with shock and pain as her blood fell to the pavement and was washed into the gutter. She was hurt, but that had bought me time, so I pulled myself up and struck out at Eamon, punching him hard in the face. Eamon squealed as he stumbled backwards, blood pouring from his nose. He was hurt, but not down. Now the killer had a reason to be angry. I watched fearfully as Eamon's eyes narrowed, and he tightened his grip on the knife handle. He made it to launch another murderous attack, but never got the chance. I saw a blur of movement in the corner of my eye, a white beast tearing across the street in a lightning assault. Eamon had no time to react before the hellhound hit him from behind, knocking him to the pavement, before biting deep into his exposed neck. Eamon's scream squirmed and fought, but to no avail, as the beast tore his throat out and spilled his blood on the roadside where it had swept into the gutters by the rainwater. I spotted Eamon's discarded knife and reached down to grab it. Then I went to Anna's aid, whilst the hound finished off its prey. As I helped the wounded Anna to her feet, I looked past the bloody scene and saw the harbinger standing at the far end of the street. His black robes somehow dried despite the heavy rain. His piercing, eyeless gaze focused on us. The harbinger had sent his killer dog to finish Eamon, but he surely hadn't done so to save us. I knew Anna and I would be next, so I took my wounded companion's hand and we ran towards the sanctuary of the Nexus station. We made it inside, savoring the shelter from the relentless deluge. The kiosk was unattended, but I noticed 2 tickets sitting on the counter, waiting for us. This couldn't be a coincidence, so Anna and I grasped hold of the paper slips and proceeded inside the station. Anna groaned in pain as I helped her walk forward. What we found were 2 platforms connected by an elevated footbridge. Closest platform already had a train waiting, its engine running and carriage doors open. The salvation was so close, but we heard a manic barking just behind us. I glanced over my shoulder as we ran down the platform, seeing a hellhound charging towards us with Amy's fresh blood dripping from her fangs. We reached the carriage door, but the hound was right on top of us. I made a split-second decision, shoving Anna inside just before the doors automatically closed. Anna cried out my name and slammed her bloody hands on the carriage window, but I turned away from her to face my attacker. The hound jumped me, knocking me down to my platform whilst clawing at my chest. I watched fearfully from the ground, noting how the harbinger stood by the far end of the platform, always watching but not intervening. His hound retreated behind her master, licking her wounds. I had an opportunity to save myself, and was determined to take it, but when I tried to board the carriage, I found the doors were still closed, and the train was now moving slowly, but surely making its way down the platform. I looked through the carriage window and saw Anne on the other side bleeding and crying, as she called out my name. We were so close and yet couldn't reach each other. My heart was broken in that moment, but at least Anna was safe. I lost her gaze as the train pulled away, and Anna was left alone on the platform with my assailants. I expected a second and probably fatal attack, but to my surprise, the Harbinger stood still, with the wounded, not docile hound by his side. They didn't attack, but the Harbinger and his dog still blocked the platform. The train was gone, and so there was only one place to go, across the footbridge over to the far platform. So I made my way onto the bridge, clutching the claw wounds on my chest, struggling with every step. But I fought through the pain and got to the far side, glancing wearily back to the first platform where the Harbinger still stood. I had nowhere left to go, and salvation came when it all but given up hope. As I looked up the tracks, I saw bright headlights of the second train approaching from the opposite direction, announcing its arrival with a blaring horn. I stood on a dark platform, awestruck as the empty train came to a stop in front of me before its door swung open. I only hesitated for a second before stepping on board. I had no idea where the train was headed or what it had in store for me, but I reckoned anywhere was better than here, and so I embarked, nervously sitting at a table and looking back at the Harbinger, feeling his burning glare upon me, as he watched me leave his hellish realm, because a moment later the train pulled away from the station and sped down the tracks. I've been traveling for a few hours now, and the signs are good. We left the bleak, dark city behind long ago, before hurtling through the many miles of forest. But now I can see an actual city, with cars, people, and all signs of bustling civilization, which I missed so much over the last 3 days. I am hurt and almost broken, but I'm almost home. There are so many unanswered questions rattling around my head. Why was I chosen to ride, and more importantly, why had I survived when others hadn't? What was that Shadowlands Express? Who controlled it, and for what purpose? One question takes precedence over the others. Whereas Anna, did her train take her home, or has she been transported somewhere else to another hell beyond? I don't have the answers, not yet, but I won't rest until I'm reunited with Anna, and I know she's safe.